We also learned more today about the FBI's secret files on Marilyn Monroe. They reveal some of her friends were suspected communists, and she once considered traveling to the Soviet Union. The FBI kept files on her from 1955 until her death in 1962.
Even decades after her death, Marilyn Monroe remains one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries. Officially, her cause of death was ruled a probable suicide due to a barbiturate overdose. But from the very beginning, whispers surrounded the story. Was it really suicide? Or was something more sinister at play? The media initially accepted the official explanation, but behind closed doors, those closest to Marilyn knew something didn't add up. There were too many inconsistencies, too many loose ends. Friends described her as optimistic about her future, planning a career comeback. Not exactly the mindset of someone ready to give up. One of the few people who never bought the official story was Frank Sinatra. A longtime friend of Marilyn's, Sinatra believed there was more to her death than the world was being told. And before his own death, he would open up about what he thought really happened that tragic night. "People don't want to know the truth," Sinatra once said quietly to a friend, reflecting on Hollywood's darker side. As we peel back the layers of Marilyn's life and her final days, one thing becomes clear. This wasn't just another Hollywood tragedy. This was something far bigger. To truly understand how Marilyn ended up at the center of such a heartbreaking mystery, we first need to understand where she came from. The pain, the longing, and the instability that shaped her from the very start. Marilyn Monroe's troubled childhood. Marilyn Monroe, born Norma Jean Mortensen in 1926, never had a real home. She spent her early years shuffled between foster homes, orphanages, and distant relatives. Her mother, Gladys, struggled with mental illness and was in and out of institutions, leaving Marilyn constantly searching for love and safety. As a young girl, Marilyn discovered she had a half-sister named Bernice, but they didn't meet until she was a teenager. Family ties were fragile, almost imaginary. Marilyn grew up feeling abandoned and invisible. One heartbreaking memory she shared: "I used to pretend I was a princess. Princesses don't cry, so I didn't cry either." This deep emotional wound never really healed. Throughout her life, Marilyn would cling to anyone who offered her affection, an echo of the little girl still longing for someone to stay. Her chaotic childhood built the foundation for everything that would follow: the vulnerability, the desperate search for love, and the cracks that fame could never quite cover up. Despite the heartbreak she carried, Marilyn was determined to rise above it all. Her journey from Norma Jean to the dazzling Marilyn Monroe was just beginning, and it would change Hollywood forever. Marilyn's rise to fame. Norma Jean's transformation into Marilyn Monroe wasn't overnight. It was a hard-fought climb. She began as a model, catching attention with her dazzling smile and curvy figure. But Marilyn wasn't content with being just a pretty face. She wanted more. She wanted respect, artistry, and validation. She signed her first film contract with 20th Century Fox in 1946 and chose the name Marilyn Monroe, combining the first name of a Broadway star with her mother's maiden name. This new identity became a mask she wore so well that even she sometimes forgot who Norma Jean was underneath. Her early roles were small and often typecast her as the bubbly blonde. But behind the scenes, she was studying acting with some of the best teachers in Hollywood. Marilyn wasn't the dumb blonde she played on screen. She was intelligent, sensitive, and desperate to be taken seriously. Yet, no matter how much she achieved, that deep-seated insecurity remained. Hollywood is a place where they'll pay you $1,000 for a kiss and 50 cents for your soul. Marilyn once said, exposing the ugly truth behind the glamour. While her career was taking off, Marilyn's personal life was a different story, full of rushed marriages, broken dreams, and the endless search for someone to fill the loneliness inside her heart. Marilyn's early marriages and broken dreams. At just 16, Marilyn married James Doherty, her neighbor, to escape returning to an orphanage. It was a marriage of convenience, not passion. James wanted a traditional wife. Marilyn wanted the world. As she began modeling and chasing her dreams, the gap between them grew. Doherty wanted a quiet life. Marilyn craved the spotlight. "I was never cut out to be just a housewife," she later admitted. Their divorce was inevitable, but it wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the start of a pattern. Marilyn would marry 3 times, each time searching for security, love, and understanding she never quite found. Her relationships were often rushed, intense, and ultimately heartbreaking. Fame only made it harder. Men wanted the fantasy of Marilyn Monroe, not the complicated, fragile woman behind the smile. Despite the cracks forming in her personal life, Marilyn's fame only burned brighter. But with the flashing cameras came even greater pressures. Pressures that would push her closer to the edge. Hollywood fame and personal battles. By the early 1950s, Marilyn Monroe was everywhere. On magazine covers, movie screens, and in the dreams of millions. But behind the dazzling smile was a woman fighting demons the public couldn't see. She was trapped in a persona, the dumb blonde the studios loved and sold to the world. But Marilyn was anything but dumb. She read constantly, studied literature, and had political passions. Still, the industry only cared about her body, not her mind. The endless scrutiny fed her anxiety and depression. Studio executives exploited her, directors belittled her, and co-stars dismissed her as little more than a pretty face. To cope, Marilyn turned to sleeping pills, alcohol, and constant therapy sessions. As she once heartbreakingly confessed, "I'm not interested in money. I just want to be wonderful." But the more she gave, the more Hollywood demanded, and the more isolated she became. Marilyn was a prisoner in her own fame, smiling for the cameras while privately falling apart. And when it came to love, things were no different. Marilyn Monroe's love life, much like her career, became a beautiful tragedy full of soaring highs and devastating lows. Monroe's complex love life. Marilyn Monroe's love life was as complicated as the woman herself. To the world, she was the ultimate fantasy. But behind closed doors, she was someone desperate for real, lasting love. Her marriage to baseball legend Joe DiMaggio seemed like a fairy tale at first. A national hero marrying Hollywood's brightest star. But the reality was different. DiMaggio was a traditional man who wanted Marilyn to give up acting and live quietly as his wife. He didn't understand or accept the demands of her fame. His jealousy and her need for independence clashed violently. Their marriage, full of love and heartbreak, lasted just 9 turbulent months. Then came playwright Arthur Miller, a man Marilyn believed could see her soul. She called him the only one who ever loved her for who she really was. They married in 1956, and for a brief time, it seemed Marilyn had found peace. But even Miller grew disillusioned as Marilyn's mental health struggles deepened. His private notes revealed that he often felt ashamed of her, a betrayal that cut Marilyn deeply. And then there were the affairs, brief but intense connections with powerful men, including President John F. Kennedy and, reportedly, his brother Robert F. Kennedy. To Marilyn, these relationships offered intimacy and excitement, but they also exposed her to dangerous political games far beyond her control. She once said, "I'm just a small girl in a big world trying to find someone to love." In the end, she found plenty of admirers, but few who truly understood her. As her personal life spiraled, the professional world she had fought so hard to conquer also began slipping away. Marilyn's final months would become a heartbreaking race against time, a fight to reclaim her career, her image, and perhaps herself. The last days of Marilyn Monroe. By 1962, Marilyn's life was a storm she could no longer control. She was fired from her movie Something's Got to Give after repeated absences and erratic behavior on set. The studio blamed her, the media mocked her, and the public's patience wore thin. But those closest to her saw the truth. Marilyn was battling severe depression, chronic insomnia, and addiction to prescription drugs. She was trying, desperately, to stage a comeback, even agreeing to a series of revealing photo shoots to rebrand herself as a serious actress and mature woman. Photographer Bert Stern captured some of her most iconic final images, showing both her vulnerability and her luminous beauty. Marilyn was planning new projects, giving interviews, and talking about her hopes for the future. Despite her struggles, she wasn't giving up. Still, her inner circle knew she was fragile. It was like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, one friend recalled. One misstep, one bad night, and it could all come crashing down. And, tragically, that night did come. But when investigators arrived at Marilyn's home after her death, what they found only deepened the mystery and raised chilling questions that would haunt Hollywood forever. The night Marilyn Monroe died August 4, 1962, should have been an ordinary Saturday night. But at Marilyn's Brentwood home, something went terribly wrong. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, later claimed she became concerned when she couldn't get a response from Marilyn's locked bedroom. She called. Marilyn's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, who arrived, broke in and found her lifeless body. The scene was odd from the start. Bottles of pills were scattered around, but no glass of water was nearby. Strange if she had swallowed so many pills. Even stranger, the reports from Murray and Greenson kept changing. Timelines didn't match. Statements were vague. Police were called several hours after Marilyn was discovered, an unusual delay that fueled suspicions immediately. And crucial evidence, like phone records from that night, conveniently disappeared. There were too many contradictions, one investigator later said. It didn't feel right from the start. The official ruling was probable suicide. But among those who loved Marilyn and those who knew the dirty politics of Hollywood and Washington, there was a growing belief that this was no accident and no ordinary overdose. One of the people who refused to accept the official story was Frank Sinatra. His bond with Marilyn ran deeper than most knew, and in the days after her death, Sinatra began asking dangerous questions, questions that would lead him into a dark and terrifying world. Frank Sinatra's close bond with Marilyn. To the world, Frank Sinatra was the chairman of the board, the ultimate symbol of cool. But to Marilyn, he was something much more, a trusted friend. Unlike many men in her life, Sinatra didn't try to control her or mold her into someone else. He accepted her as she was, fragile, funny, brilliant, and often heartbreakingly sad. Their relationship was never a steamy romance. Instead, it was rooted in mutual understanding. Both had grown up with rough childhoods. Both had battled loneliness in the middle of adoration. Marilyn confided in Frank about her struggles, her heartbreak over the Kennedys, her fears of being discarded, her loneliness despite her fame. She told Frank things she couldn't tell anyone else, said Tony Opetizano, one of Sinatra's closest associates. When Marilyn died, Sinatra was devastated, but he was also suspicious. He knew her too well to believe she had simply given up. Marilyn had told him she was looking forward to new projects. She was even talking about reconciling with Joe DiMaggio. Something didn't fit. Fueled by grief and loyalty, Sinatra wasn't content to simply mourn. He launched his own quiet investigation, determined to find out what really happened to his dear friend, Marilyn Monroe. Sinatra's private investigations begin. Sinatra wasn't the type to sit back and accept a convenient story, especially when it came to someone he cared about. Quietly, using his own resources, he began digging into Marilyn's final days. He hired private investigators to look into her death, determined to uncover what the police and public had missed, or deliberately ignored. The findings were unsettling. Phone records from the night Marilyn died had mysteriously vanished. Witnesses changed their stories. There were whispers that important figures, from politics to organized crime, had been deeply entangled in Marilyn's life at the very end. One investigator Sinatra trusted told him bluntly, "Frank, this wasn't just a suicide. There are fingerprints all over this, and they're not Marilyn's." Rumors tied to the mafia, to the Kennedys, even to labor bosses like Jimmy Hoffa, all started swirling around. Sinatra, who had his own complicated ties to some of these worlds, began to realize the stakes were much higher than he had imagined. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he was certain of one thing: Marilyn Monroe didn't die by her own hand. And as Sinatra dug deeper, he would uncover a web of dangerous secrets, ones that stretched from the White House to the mafia, and pointed toward a chilling motive for Marilyn's tragic end. The mafia, the Kennedys, and dangerous secrets. As Sinatra's private investigation widened, the picture grew darker. Marilyn Monroe wasn't just tangled in Hollywood scandals. She was caught in a deadly web of politics, power, and crime. Her rumored affairs with President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert F. Kennedy were an open secret among the Hollywood elite. To many, she was simply a woman in love. But to those in power, she had become a dangerous liability. Sinatra, with his own connections to powerful people and the mafia, began hearing disturbing whispers. Mafia bosses like Sam Giancana were allegedly furious with the Kennedys, feeling betrayed after helping JFK win the presidency, but getting nothing in return. Marilyn, fragile and hurt after being pushed away by both Kennedy brothers, supposedly knew too much. She had seen and heard things at private parties and intimate meetings that could have destroyed political careers and exposed criminal dealings. She was a walking time bomb, one of Sinatra's confidants later said, and everyone knew it. Frank came to believe that Marilyn wasn't silenced just because she was unstable. She was silenced because she had become a threat to the Kennedys, to the mafia, to the delicate power balance of an entire generation. And as if that weren't enough, Sinatra learned of one more chilling detail. Marilyn may have been planning to go public, putting herself and many others in even greater danger. The press conference Marilyn allegedly planned. In the weeks before her untimely death, Marilyn Monroe was reportedly preparing for something big, a press conference that she believed would change the course of her life. Those closest to her said she was eager to announce her reconciliation with Joe DiMaggio, the baseball legend who had always been one of the few steady, genuine figures in her stormy world. A reunion between Marilyn and Joe would have been a headline sensation, a feel-good story that the public would have embraced with open arms. But not everyone was excited about what Marilyn might say. Beneath the romantic story was a far more dangerous possibility. Some insiders whispered that Marilyn wasn't just planning to talk about love. She was hurt, deeply betrayed, and heartbreakingly alone after being cast aside by the Kennedys. Men she had trusted, men she believed loved her. Sinatra and others close to her feared that her pain might drive her to reveal things that powerful people desperately wanted kept secret. Frank Sinatra believed, with growing certainty, that the press conference wasn't simply a personal announcement. It was a looming threat. In her vulnerable, emotional state, Marilyn may have been ready to expose the affairs she had with both President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert F. Kennedy. She might have spoken of secret meetings, whispered promises, and the political webs she had unknowingly walked into. And in doing so, she could have brought scandal crashing down on some of the most powerful men in America. The idea of Marilyn Monroe, the most famous woman in the world, standing before a sea of microphones and telling her truth, was terrifying to the political elite. She was beloved by millions. Whatever she said, whether fact or emotion, would have instantly become global news. Her words could have shaken the very foundation of American politics and changed history forever. Sinatra was sure that this looming press conference was the final straw. She wasn't killed for who she was, one insider close to Frank allegedly told him. She was killed for what she knew and what she might say. To them, Marilyn wasn't just a troubled starlet anymore. She had become a ticking time bomb, a beautiful liability that had to be neutralized before she could ignite a scandal too big to contain. The closer it got to the date she had reportedly set to face the media, the more dangerous her situation became. And tragically, Marilyn Monroe would never get the chance to tell her side of the story. As Sinatra connected the dots, a chilling and heartbreaking theory began to take shape in his mind, one that pointed not to a tragic accident, not even to a desperate suicide, but to something far more sinister. A cold, calculated murder designed to silence a voice that had finally found the courage to speak. A planned assassination. Sinatra came to believe that Marilyn Monroe's death was no accident. It was a planned assassination, orchestrated to protect the most powerful families in America. The method, he was told, was designed to leave no trace. A barbiturate suppository administered while Marilyn was unconscious, ensuring a fatal overdose without the telltale signs of force or struggle. There were rumors that labor boss Jimmy Hoffa, desperate to retain leverage over the Kennedys, was involved. Mafia figures, political operatives, and even corrupted medical officials all allegedly played a role in covering up the truth. Sinatra heard that Marilyn had been given the fatal dose at the direction of someone with a lot to lose if her secrets ever became public. They had to make it look like an accident, one of Sinatra's contacts told him. And they made sure it stuck. To Sinatra, the puzzle pieces fit too well. The missing phone records, the odd behavior of her housekeeper and psychiatrist, the political pressure, the sudden erasure of certain evidence. None of it made sense if Marilyn had simply overdosed by mistake. Frank was horrified, not just by the crime itself, but by the world it revealed. A world where a vulnerable woman could be eliminated to protect powerful men, with the whole system working to hide the truth. And though he could never fully prove it, Sinatra never stopped believing in his theory, carrying it with him to his own final days. A burden of sorrow and loyalty he never let go. Sinatra's unshakable belief. Until his final days. Until his death in 1998, Frank Sinatra never wavered in his belief that Marilyn Monroe had been murdered. It wasn't a theory to him. It was a conviction etched into his soul. Those closest to Frank said Marilyn's death haunted him for the rest of his life, a wound that never truly healed. It wasn't just sadness. It was a potent mix of rage, guilt, and a deep, bitter sense of injustice that stayed with him and like a shadow. Frank often spoke bitterly, even decades later, about the political elites who he believed used Marilyn for their own purposes and then coldly abandoned her when she became a liability. In private conversations, he didn't mince words. "She deserved better," he once said, voice heavy with emotion. "And they killed her for being loyal." To Frank, Marilyn wasn't just collateral damage in the game of power. She was a casualty of a ruthless system that chewed people up and spit them out. Despite his massive fame and influence, Sinatra knew there were limits to how much he could push against that invisible wall of power. These were dangerous men, with dangerous connections. Speaking out too publicly would have risked everything: his career, his reputation, even his life. Sinatra understood the stakes better than most. He had seen how secrets were kept, and how those who threatened to reveal them were swiftly silenced. So Frank did what little he could. He honored Marilyn's memory in his own quiet ways. He shared what he knew and suspected only with people he trusted, never putting anything in writing, never giving the media a target. In a world where so many wanted to reduce Marilyn Monroe to nothing more than a cautionary tale of excess and tragedy, Frank insisted on remembering the real woman, the vulnerable soul who, despite all her fame, had simply wanted to be loved, to be understood, to matter. Through the passing years, through marriages, heartbreaks, political betrayals, and personal losses, Sinatra never changed his mind. He remained steadfast. To him, Marilyn wasn't just the world's most famous blonde. She was a human being, crushed under the weight of secrets too heavy for her to carry alone. He carried her story with him like a solemn vow he could never quite fulfill. As one close friend of Frank once said, he never stopped thinking about her. To him, Marilyn's death was one of the greatest injustices he had ever witnessed, and he never forgave the people he believed were responsible. And even though decades have passed since that tragic night in 1962, the echoes of Marilyn Monroe's life and the chilling mystery of her death still haunt Hollywood. Her story, once whispered behind closed doors, now stands as a stark, heartbreaking reminder of the true cost of fame and the price of telling too much truth in a world that wasn't ready to hear it. A life and death that changed Hollywood forever. Marilyn Monroe's life was full of glitter, but her death uncovered something much darker, something Hollywood could never fully cover up again. She wasn't just a movie star. She became a symbol of lost innocence, of exploited fame, and of how power can crush even the brightest lights. Thanks to voices like Frank Sinatra's, we understand that Marilyn's death wasn't just personal tragedy. It was a crack in the glamorous facade of Hollywood and politics. Her story revealed the brutal truth about the pressures placed on women in the industry, the dangerous entanglements between celebrities and politicians, and the way a vulnerable woman could be sacrificed for the sake of protecting powerful men. Today, Marilyn's legacy is more complicated than ever. We see her not just as the dazzling blonde in a white dress, but as a human being who battled demons, sought love, and fought for control over her own life, and who, according to many, paid the ultimate price for getting too close to the truth. Frank Sinatra's final gift to Marilyn was keeping her real story alive. The story of a woman silenced too soon, but whose voice, in whispers and memories, still refuses to be buried.